So we are very, very proud. Well, you are in a unique situation because we are releasing today at 10, and you're going to get a preview of the data, the Battleground survey. And Ed will talk more about this, but this is a survey that we've been conducting for over 30 years. It started, as all good things start, in a Hungarian piano bar. And we were both in Hungary working on election observations. And it was very, very meaningful work for me because at the time, my best friend and roommate in college had come over from Hungary in 1956. She came over at the age of 1, and her father had been in the military and had to leave the country because he had given arms to the rebels. And who would have imagined that we would be coming full circle to Ukraine today? So it's really stunning. As so many things are. Ed was telling me yesterday, and I'm sure he will tell you more, that we have conducted over 800,000 interviews now over the course of the Battleground surveys. So we brought a lot of American voices to the table. And one of the things that we both really feel is that polling, it can be misused and abused, and we're glad to take questions on that. Although it's always disappointing to see grown pollsters cry, but if you want to get into polling, we're glad to do that. But one of the things we both strongly feel is this is an essential part of democracy and accountability, of bringing the voices of the public to the table. One of the things about the Battleground survey is that we start with an agreed upon questionnaire, because you can't call two people and say, let's ask you 2 different questionnaires. But after that, we each write our own analysis, and we don't see each other's analysis till the day before the release. And that has been a phenomenal learning experience, I think, for both of us, but I'll speak for myself, to really see the same data and see it analyzed. And it tends to temper the analysis. We're not going for shock and awe. And pollsters in general are different from most talking heads on cable news, because for us, the data is the data. You might want to do something different with the data, but if we see something different in the data, we go and ask each other. A colleague of Ed's I once was presenting with, and he said Romney was 10 points ahead. And I said, really? And I said to him afterwards, gosh, we don't have that in our data. He said, oh, yeah, we don't have that in our data either. His staffer was in the audience, and we're working for Romney, so I just had to say that. So usually the data is the data. And we stick pretty close to it, but then look at it from different perspectives. So today, what we have transitioned the Battleground survey with an idea. We now are located at Georgetown, and Mo Alithri, who wrote the foreword to our book, is also our partner on the Battleground survey, and came up with the idea of the civility poll, that the threat to democracy, that the polarization was so great that it was worth having not just 1 or 2 questions look at it, but a whole poll devoted to looking at what's underneath the data, what are the trends over time, and how does this data manifest itself. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the Democratic perspective, and we have memos available that will be posted at noon today on the Georgetown website. We can also send them to Jim to make sure he can send them to you. But we want to share with you a little bit of what we found. So first, in terms of the voters' mood, and I think that's an interesting question because of what happened in these elections. We're glad to deal with that in Q&A, but people were believing that the country was off on the wrong track. They were more optimistic than they had been in July. And that was primarily Democrats who were more optimistic. And you always see this, that the party in charge is always a little cross-pressured. Like, do I say good track, right track, or wrong track? Because it's going on the wrong track, but they might think it's our guy's fault. We don't think it's our guy's fault, so what are we going to say? But one of the things that you did see is that you saw just before the election, the Democrats move into thinking the country was going in the right direction. And that was mobilizing. You did see some late mobilization of Democrats around the abortion issue, around more optimism, around the threat to democracy, too, interestingly. In terms of concerns, voters were very concerned about the economy. They were very concerned about abortion. We can talk about that at another time. But they were also very concerned about the threats to democracy. And there was bipartisan concern about the threat to democracy. 2/3 of Americans are concerned about, 68% concerned that political speech was inspiring people to take violent action. 2/3 of the people feeling that they wanted to move in a different direction, that there was a threat to democracy. People worried about elections being fair. But when you look underneath that, both parties concerned about that, people had different things in mind. And one of the things I like about the surveys that we've done in the Battleground and that we have done with Ed is we've asked the follow-up question, not just the shock and awe question that gets you a headline on Morning Joe, but what do you mean by that? And for example, in the data, we found that Democrats were most concerned about voter intimidation, voter suppression. Republicans most concerned about voter fraud. And it's interesting because independents ebbed and flowed between the two groups. And this is something I must say, if you're a consumer of data, it's very, very important to always ask the follow-up question and demand of your pollsters ask the follow-up question. We did some work independent of the Battleground survey on CRT. And I won't get into the CRT issue in this group, but 2/3 of Americans said that 2/3 of parents said, I have problems with curriculum that the schools are teaching. And our client, which was the teachers union, that was like, oh my God, that's pretty serious. But then we asked the follow-up question, what concerns you about curriculum in the schools? You know what the top answer was? Yes. Not CRT. Sorry? COVID, no, not COVID, although I thought it would be COVID. Modern math. People said, I can't help my kids with their homework. And I'm home teaching. I see some parents nodding their heads here. We had a person in a focus group said, I finally told my kid, listen, long division was good enough for your father and I. You're just going to have to do long division for a year. The second answer, again, not sex ed, not COVID, not CRT, financial literacy. People think their kids don't know how to have basic math skills, financial skills that you need to survive. So always very, very important to ask the follow-up question. People really think the country is divided, and you have to wonder what planet. This is the way to identify Martians who are visiting America. If they do not think the country is divided, they probably just got here. 83% agreed that political division in our country is worse than it's ever been. 67% strongly agreed with that. And of course, you don't get numbers like that unless you get everybody bipartisanly agreeing. And people believe that the polarization and the division are dangerously high. One of the things that was one of the most interesting questions we asked, and I was honestly flabbergasted by these results when we first asked them. So we asked people to rate, and we have time series on this now, and Ed will talk about this a little bit more because we were on the eve of January 6th when we were polling inadvertently. But we asked people to rate it on a scale from 0 to 100. 0, no political division in the country. 100, we're on the edge of civil war. Well, and so I imagine, honestly, the ratings would be around 55, 60, maybe. What do you think the average was?
75.
75. Very close, 71, down a little bit. Verging on civil war. That's where people think we are. Young people thinking the same thing. And we also asked for the first time a very sobering question. Where do you think it will be? And this was polling done right after the election. Where do you think it'll be a year from now? And people had very, very similar answers. One of the key values, and we talk about this a lot in the book, it's the origin of the book, is respect. People really, really believe in the importance of that value. And it's a core value for all parties. 97% of Democrats, 94% of Republicans, 90% of independents believe that respect for each other is the first step to having a government that works. Now, I'll just speak for the Democrats. I'll let Ed speak for the Republicans. 97% of Democrats don't believe in the 4th of July, okay? This is an amazing number. As Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized party. I'm a Democrat. So that is just stunning. Those are stunning, stunning numbers. And people believe that civility is the language of respect. Both of us were raised, we weren't raised in perfect families by a long shot, but I was raised in a Republican ranch family. Ed was raised in a Democratic military family. And we both, as we were writing this book, realized that we were both taught a very, very fundamental value, which was respect, that you grant people respect based on their humanity. So we were very interested in young people's view of this because we were thinking at the time that young people are kind of the future of America, and they are the future of America. But what was interesting is that young people were much more cynical about the respect value. They said, and maybe you've had these arguments with your teenagers, that who don't respect their parents, of course, no one would expect that, but respect for other people. But young people believe in general that respect has to be earned, that I don't grant you my respect, you have to earn my respect. And that is very fundamentally different than the premise of the book, which is you grant respect. Now, you can lose it, but you grant it based on people's humanity and assume respect for each other. So it's a really interesting tension. One of the things that I love about polling is that you get at what people are really thinking and why they're thinking and what the connections they make. But we also have in polling this saying, at least on the Democratic side, that people often believe mutually contradictory things and usually deeply resent having it pointed out to them. And some of you who work for politicians, you know this, right? Or if you've ever done a phone bank or a canvas, you know this. So we found that people believe very, very strongly that there should be compromise so that we can come together and work together. People also strongly feel that there should be something that people should stand up for what they believe. Now, this survey asked people to choose between those things as well as rate both of them. And over 2/3 of Americans agreed with both of those principles. People chose compromise to get things done over stand up for your values when it was juxtaposed. But you could tell in the interviewing that a lot of people would actually like to see both. And one of the things that's really true, particularly for women in this data, is they believe that any 3 women in America could agree on more than Congress does. So it's an interesting time. The last thing we looked at, and then I'll turn it over to Ed, was what was behind threats in democracy. What were people thinking about? What were they really worried about? Increasing amount of violent behavior. You saw a lot of consistency around violence. And there's both sidesism to violence. People don't think it's solidly on one side, but there's no question that January 6th was motivating 2 Democrats in the last election. One of the things that is very, very interesting, we worked with a set of scholars in Canada, and they compared Canadian and U.S. attitudes. And the biggest difference between Canadian and U.S. attitudes? The proclivity of Americans for violence. And actually, the proclivity of Americans for violence is rising among young Americans, particularly young men. So very, very unsettling and disturbing phenomenon. News coverage that favors only one political party, political candidates refusing to accept valid election results, which really bother Democrats. Social media only enforcing one side. One of the things we did that was really, really fun was Ed is teaching a class, and in fact the book was founded on a class. He'll talk to you about that. And we put that class in charge of fixing social media, although we told them they only had 30 minutes to do it. But that's a long time, right? In a 9-second soundbite world, 30 minutes, good Lord. And they were brilliant. They had some really, really cool ideas because for them, social media is their first language, really. And the ideas that they came up with, but there is no question that right now, social media contributes to the division. Finally, as we looked at this data, we found that Americans are really waiting for leadership. They are really looking for leaders on both sides of the aisle who will bring this country together, who won't weaponize crises. We have a whole chapter in the book, and I'm still not sure that we completely got it right, but we have a whole chapter devoted to COVID because, and Jim, I appreciated so much your example, because it's the first time that we, in our lifetimes, and we went through Vietnam and everything. Obviously, we were in kindergarten then, but we went through Vietnam. That a crisis didn't unite America, but was weaponized. And that is a very, very disturbing phenomenon. And again, I don't know that we have completely right the analysis on it, but it was a sign of how troubling the divisions can be, and Americans troubled by those divisions. So let me turn it over to Ed to fill in the rest of the story.
Right.
Except for not being able to get the mics at the right height. I've loved working with Celinda over the last 31 years. So let me start off, because I'm going to try to fill in a couple of things that we saw in the survey on the election. But tell you one thing I saw in the election was that there was a real ebb and flow on who was doing better. Through the end of the spring, Republicans were on a real high note. We had been really gaining a lot of traction in terms of support, not only of the hardcore Republicans, but soft Republicans and independents, and even a few Democrats kind of coming over in our direction. The Supreme Court decision then, and the Democrats were very good going after their base, not all voters, but their base, which included a lot of women that considered themselves still to be soft Republicans or ticket splitters. And so the numbers started moving back in their direction. We never lost the lead, but the lead closed quite a bit. Then in early September, and I have to make clear this is my analysis, not Celinda's. If you remember, Joe Biden went out and gave a big speech where he just very, almost viciously, compared to what we're used to with Biden, went after MAGA Republicans. And what was interesting is that started a movement back to the Republican Party, because those soft Republicans, those ticket splitters that had moved away from us during the summer, if they had to choose between the Biden economy and the Republican policies in that area, they then began moving back to us. What was interesting was his speech that he gave on democracy at the end of the campaign. My reaction to that speech was it was a very good speech. It was probably 18 months too late. He should have given that very early in his administration. But that ended up not being the case, because for those soft Republicans and those ticket splitters, they then started moving back towards the Democrats, or our intensity started going down. The other thing that was happening during that time, and look, I make it, I make no apology about the fact I'm not a big Trump liker. I didn't go and join the Lincoln Project. I thought they were wrong in what they did. I stayed within the party and tried to fight within the party. But he then started moving around in the campaigns at the same time as that democracy speech, and that moved some people away from us in the campaign. In fact, one of the most interesting statistics I have on the election is in congressional races. He went into 8 congressional districts in the fall. We lost 7 of those 8 districts. He didn't move them over the top, he moved them to the bottom. And so, we have to be very honest of that impact. In fact, it's very funny that the day he announced for president again, the whole idea of doing the book came from doing a fellowship at Georgetown on civility in 2018. I hadn't talked to Celinda about doing it with me, but I thought the book had to not be Trump-centric. And so when he lost, I called Celinda up or sent her an email, and we had a day of back and forth emails on, do you want to write a book together? This is what I want to do. And I went back and checked when that first email went, and it was exactly 2 years to the day of when Trump announced he was going to run for president again. And I thought, geez, here we go again. And that is somewhat the reaction that the American public's having to him. One of the interesting things I saw over the last 2 years with Republicans is right after the election, there were about 60% of Republicans that I put in the category of follow them anytime, anyplace. There was about 30% that had fallen into what I thought was a safe haven, which was, I agree with his policies, I just don't like the way he acts. And then there were 10% that were anti-Trumpers or never-Trumpers, but stayed within the party. By this summer, the last time we looked at it, there had been a 20% movement from the believes everything he says to the I like his policies, but I don't like the way he acts. So now they are 50% of the Republican electorate. The believes everything he says and does is only 40%, and then you still have the 10% that are never Trumpers. That's the environment we're working in. But those people that are doing news analysis that says if he gets into the race with a multi-candidate field, he is probably going to win the nomination again. And I would say it would be likely because he does very well when he only has to get 30, 35, 40% of the electorate. One of the questions that we did look into in this survey was the whole question of democracy. And is democracy under attack? And the thing we did find, to varying degrees, that it's a very high belief. 75% of the American public believes that democracy is currently under attack. 65% believe that strongly. So it's more than just Democrats. It's more than Republicans, and it certainly has a good deal of ticket splitters in that component. And there's various reasons. I think one of the things that, if you don't generalize the issue when you're talking about it, and there was a certain amount of that when Biden made his speech, it was more of a pro-America speech than a pro-democracy speech, so it appealed to a wide variety of people. But they do have different reasons for feeling that. But they all, for every reason, are over 50%, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. The Civil War question that we asked. So that came back on a scale of 1 to 100. The mean believing that we are closer to a civil war than we were to no political division was at 71%. Now, that has an interesting comparison because, let's see, 5 times ago in surveys, we asked that question in January of 2021, I'm sorry. And the interesting thing about that week in the polling we did was that we were in the field on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And on Wednesday morning, it was January 6th. So we were able to day code our data and look at the first 2 days versus the second 2 days. And there was some difference, but not a lot of difference.
Yeah.
Back then, 75% believe we're closer to a civil war. And that's when them seeing what looked to be maybe a civil war occurring at our capital. So they have moved in that direction. But we asked a question. Do you think it is ever justified to use violence to advance a political or public policy goal? 90% of the American public says no. 84% say no strongly. 10% says yes. 6% strongly. So very lopsided in that direction. And it's one of the things that I kind of point out that, yes, we have January 6th as Republicans we have to deal with, a yoke around our neck. In fact, I ended up writing an introduction in the book, or a forward in the book, that I had to come back, even though I wanted it not to be Trump-centric. I had to admit that we were writing this book under the shadow of January 6th and acknowledge that it was there. The other 2 questions I want to talk about are 2 questions we put in for the first time. One is respect for each other is the first step in having a government that works. 95% agree with that. 95%. And that was the premise of our book. Second is something that we started off to write about civility, and we ended up changing it to respect. Because one of the things we came to realize as we were putting the book together is that civility is just the language of respect. And so we asked that question. 92% agree with that question. One of the things, and I'm going to turn it over to Celinda to start talking about the book. One of the things that we thought was very important in the book is that we focus on the issues at hand in terms of the things that we're dealing with. But we did come to the decision that civility was the language of respect. And so we changed the title to being about respect and not about civility. So, having said that, and we can do it from here if you'd like.
Yeah, I can just do it here. So I've already talked a little bit about the book, but and I really want to acknowledge Ed and his driving force and vision here in terms of this book. So everything you like about the book, Ed deserves the credit. If there's anything you don't like, I'll take the blame. But what's really interesting, a couple of things that were really interesting about the book is we wanted to continue this brand of coming to separate analysis. And one of the things we discovered is that we could agree on the problem, but we didn't necessarily agree on the solutions. And we thought that was a strength, to put out a variety of solutions. So we identify, and we have different chapters devoted to different parts of the problem, but we then talk about the solutions in each of our own voices. And sometimes we agree on the solutions, and sometimes we offer separate solutions, like on campaign finance reform. And we also wanted, I mean, we can all hope that people would be better people, whatever, but you know, part of it is, I come from Montana, and there's a very, as Jim will speak to, there's a very strong libertarian streak in Montana, and where we don't really appeal to people's better angels. We just tend to say, none of your damn business. And that's where we get to the result. But one of the things we talk about in the book a lot is what are kind of some structural changes? What are things that, what has produced this in terms of social media, cable news, the way that Washington operates, the fact that nobody, and the unintended consequences of good policy decisions. And Ed has that I will leave to him, a theory of the consequences of policymaking, which I think is quite revealing and is discussed in the book. The last thing I'll say about the book, and then I'll turn it back to Ed, is that as I mentioned in my remarks about the poll, in the book we include two pieces that we thought were representative of what we aspire to in terms of leadership. One was Senator McCain's letter to America, and really, really feel powerful about the courage of him. And the other was Joe Biden's eulogy on Senator McCain and talking about the unusual nature of their friendship. And we thought that was really two really good examples of people who in their lives and in their friendships and in their policy making put the good of the country, right or wrong, we may agree or disagree with them on any given policy, but ahead of division, ahead of acquiring personal political power, and also showed courage in terms of doing that. The last thing I want to say, because I have so much respect as well as affection for Ed, is it's easy for me to be anti-Trump. I mean, I get brownie points for that in my party. As I said to him, although people think, yeah, so what? It's kind of ordinary. I did tell Ed's students were so cute. They said, it's so nice to have a Democrat in the group. And I said, really? Well, how many of you are Democrats? And 3/4 of them raised their hand. And I said, well, this is great. And I said, well, I'm a Democrat who actually knows socialists too. So they were very happy about that. But it's really, in all seriousness, it's a tremendous statement of courage to stay in your party and be against Trump. That is really something that is very, very gutsy in our world. And I think that that is something I really, really admire about it. So let me turn it over to him.
Thank you. And let me start off with a couple of things that kind of go into the book. First of all, those of you who have heard me speak before, I ran the McCain convention in 2008, ran the program, was very, in fact, I want to say something about Mike Pence about that. And I was very connected to him. When I moved against Trump was two reasons. One is I had a son that was 8, and I had a son that was 11 at the time when he was first running. And it bothered me, his style and his ugliness and his incivility that he had. It bothered me as a professional in politics in terms of consultant, because I understand, and I wish more people did understand, that the image of the president or your presidential candidate defines you as a Republican. And I didn't want to be defined that way. I didn't want to see our party defined that way. And so that kind of led to it. It was the kind of stamp of closure on it was when he made the comment at a town meeting in Iowa about John McCain. One of the things I respected about John McCain is he saw humanity at its worst when he was a prisoner of war. They broke his arm 8 times, just trying to get him to agree to go home first, and he wouldn't do it. There's other awful stories I could tell you of how they played not only with hurting his body, but played with his mind during that period of time. And I always felt the strength of John McCain's civility and friendship and trust was he saw the worst and wanted to be the best. And I'm going to come back to that at the end. Second is my father, who went to Korea. I have a story about that on the cover of the book. Went to Vietnam twice and died at 61 from Agent Orange. He was always wanted to be in the military because when he was a young teenager, he was walking home from having served Mass that morning as an altar boy and saw the smoke coming up from Pearl Harbor. And from that day on, all he ever wanted to do was go into the military. He, when I was 7, 1959, we were in the middle of the Atlantic, and the news came that Hawaii had been made a state. And he had hidden a flag in the suitcase, and we sat as a family and sewed a star on the flag in the middle of the Atlantic. He taught me to, and it's one of the things I'm concerned about where our country is today, he taught me to respect people because they were American. Didn't matter their color, didn't matter where they're from, it didn't matter anything except they were an American. And that was worth fighting for in his mind. One of the concerns, and we didn't address it in the book, is the lack of respect people are showing. You have to ask the question, what we see is every institution in the country is at a very low rating today. And if you don't respect America, how are you going to respect someone for being American? So I don't know what the answer is to that, but at some place we have to earn back the respect of the American people for our nation. And that responsibility falls on our elected officials. Now, one of the things that we didn't put in the book, it may be the next book, is in the research for the book, I came across this thing that talked about, they do a scatter map every 2 years of Congress. And if you look at a scatter map of the ideology of Congress in 1990, it's fairly evenly distributed right to left and left to right. If you looked at that same scatter map for 2020, there was about 15 dots in the middle, and they're at the 2 ends. And so when you explore why that has happened, you look at primaries in the late 80s, early 90s. You had about 35% of Republicans voting in Republican primaries. You have 35% of Democrats voting in Democrat primaries. Today, we're lucky if we hit 15, 16, 17%. So when we ask the question of, do you want compromise or do you want to fight? When we force issue those two questions, you end up with 30% at one end saying fight, and you have 68% saying no compromise. The interesting thing is that 30% makes up the 15% voting in the 2 primaries. So it's our hardcore ideologues on both sides of the spectrum who are voting in the primaries, and they are giving us hardcore candidates from the left and the right. They're coming here thinking their only job is to fight over principles, not to actually do something. So if there's anything we should start demanding of our party on both sides, is we should start demanding, figure out a way to up citizen participation so that the people that are choosing who the nominees are going to be going into the final decision represent more of the center as much as it does the right, far right, and the far left. I've worked with a couple of people. Celinda likes ranked choice voting. And I keep saying, look, there's only one test on whether it works. It's not, is the process more positive? It's not, is the process more engaging? The process is it bringing out more people to make that choice? Because right now the two parties are failing us in terms of providing candidates that represent real America out there. And I think that will be the first step on raising the trust. The other thing on the book is, and Celinda made some reference to it, is that, and those of you that have heard me talk before know I always talk about this, which is understanding the process of problem solving. That you talk about the problem, you talk about solutions, you implement solutions, and that creates a new set of problems. Any of you that have worked in business know that you always stop at that third step on any problem and say, are we going to make it better or are we going to make it worse? And I think part of the cynicism that we have in this country today of our voters is that we've gone through that process so many times that 90% of the things we're doing on legislation is dealing with problems created by our solutions and not the root problem. And voters sense that. I see them that all the time. That they're not getting anything done that is important to the voters in their everyday lives. And if you're not doing that, you shouldn't be here. Our forefathers had it right by putting in a Senate. They put in the Senate, when Jefferson came back from being ambassador to France and they were still putting together the country, he asked George Washington, why did they have a House and a Senate? And his response was, you just poured your tea in the saucer. Why did you do that? And he said, to let it cool. He said, that's why we have a Senate. They didn't do it to have a Senate that stops everything from going through. They had a Senate that would pause in that third step and saying, is our solution going to be worse than the problem? Or is it going to move us off in the wrong direction? And that is another thing that we kind of address in the book. So let me stop there.
Open up to your questions.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Penny, you did such a great job. You get the first question, sir.
Okay.
And it's on. Slide.
Thanks, Jim. Is there anything in the data that you saw that should be cause for hope?
Oh, God.
Did anything? Was there anything?
I love you for asking that question because he always says I'm the depressing one.
Yes, we've been asking a question on, do you believe the youth are the hope of bringing a more civil America back? And we always get in the high 60s, high 50s to mid 60s saying yes. What's interesting is that young people are very, very positive. Seniors are very, very positive. The one group that is negative upside down on that question are 34 to 44-year-olds, millennials. They are the group, and we don't know why. They're jealous because they didn't change things. I think millennials have had to deal with kind of the new America, which is they're getting married later, they're having children later, they're buying houses later, they're working in jobs later. And so all the things that cause a maturity in terms of being a citizen, not that being single doesn't make you mature, but all of that has been delayed for those millennials. And so they kind of look at the world differently, plus they were beginning to mature at a very important time in 2008 when it looked like the world was falling apart. One of the things that we did that I, in retrospect, I think was a good decision is we wrote all 9 chapters first. And we finished all 9 chapters. We had some editing to do at the end before we started writing the 10th chapter, our chapter of hope. We kind of knew we wanted to make it about the youth. And what we didn't want to do is build such a big wall in the first 9 chapters that whatever we said on hope would look Pollyannish. And I think that was a good decision in the end, because we did focus groups with young voters. And while they were very positive about civility and moving in that direction, they had an attitude that bothered me, maybe even more than it bothered Celinda, that their attitude was, I'll respect someone if they show me respect first. And it's not the way the world works if you're doing it right. I mean, those of you that have known me a long time, I've tried to build a career on being an optimist, being positive, being one of the good guys, not one of the evil consultants that come in and try to blow up the world. But it led us to a different approach at the end, which is we talked about the youth, but we came to a decision that we needed some leaders to move to come forward that will light the way for the youth. We need John McCain's to light the way for the youth. That will show that this is the way to show respect. This is the way to operate. This is the way to develop friendship and trust. And very important. And one of the things that I just had to smile at the end is I wanted to dedicate the book to McCain. I said, okay, who do you want to dedicate the book to? And she said, McCain. Hope you read the book, but I'll turn it over to you for one more.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I thought was really reassuring in the book and as a source of optimism, even if we have slightly different solutions, was the really, really strong pushback on the attack that democracy is under and the threats to democracy. And there were some tensions around some of the solutions like voter fraud versus voter intimidation, but the really wholesale sense that we need to reduce polarization. We need to change somehow the media environment in terms of the way people are getting information, the rejection of violence. So I found real hope in that. And I found it in the election results, too. I think that the public did, in the end, reject a lot of the people who were fundamentally threatening the base of democracy. And there are plenty of Republican candidates who are not in that school, and they won. And then Democrats won also as well. So I found that result very reassuring.
I want to just say one last thing about the election. What we don't know yet, first of all, we won a majority in the popular vote. I think right now we're running about 51 to 48 on the Republican candidates for Congress versus the Democratic candidates for Congress. Now, what's interesting is for years the Democrats had that plurality. And they always scream, well, it's redistricting that is causing that. I think we have to go back and look a little bit at redistricting. But I think we overran our narrative that we had come to early in the campaign, which was we had won 14 seats in 2020. And in every one of those seats, it was the seat that the Republican who won ran ahead of Donald Trump in that district. I always wondered why the Democrats never made the point of, well, if the Republicans didn't make the point that if Donald Trump ran behind these Republicans, if they were truly cheating, they'd cheat all the way down the ballot. They wouldn't just do it for Trump. They might because they hate him that much, but they wouldn't do it just for Trump. It just never made sense in the whole equation of things. But one of the things that was interesting about 2018 is that we lost a bunch of seats. Most of the seats we lost were in suburban America. Most of the seats we lost either because the members stepped down because they saw what was happening, or they were a centrist Republican who had for several years moved further to the right because of the Tea Party forcing them in that position. And we lost those districts. Every one of the 14 seats we picked up in 2020 were in seats where we ran a female candidate or a candidate of color, that we got back to this candidate is a centrist, and we won those districts back. Do you count that on the seats that we won this year? I think maybe.
Yeah.
But I also have a question we have to explore on the other side, is are we so polarized in this nation that we're going to neutralize swings in either case? And that's one of the things that will take us months to kind of analyze.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting in that is one of the things I love about polling is that conventional wisdom is wrong about 95% of the time, plus or minus 5%. And so conventional wisdom had said ticket splitting is dead. Actually, there was a record amount of ticket splitting, and particularly some of these more moderate, pragmatic Republican governors, many of whom Ed worked for, were really, really impossible to beat. And so that's, I think, a very interesting model. The other thing that was very interesting about the trend since 2020 of the Republicans running more women and people of color, we have now a record number of women in the House. We have a record number of women governors. The surge on the Democratic side was in 2018, but the remaining surge, the follow-up surge, came on the Republican side. So there really is increasing diversity, and you have now both caucuses, the Democratic and the Republican caucus, the most diverse that they have ever been in the House, which I think is a real marker for our democracy.
One last thing I know Jim wants to wrap it up maybe with some questions. One of the things we decided is we wanted to get this book to every member of Congress, Republican and Democrat. And the new laws that they have in terms of what they do with your book if you send it through the mail system, or you have to have someone guide it to every office to hand it out. The Bipartisan Policy Group Center is going to take these books to both the Republican and Democrat conferences with the new conference, both in the House and the Senate, so all four things. And they're going to have a letter signed from two people that I did the polling for one of them during his career, Trent Lott and Tom Daschle, who are really the last examples of cooperation and dealing with each other. And they're going to sign the letter to all the members. So every member will get the same book that you're getting today. And hopefully you'll read the book and encourage them to look at it closely, because I think there may be some answers on how to move the country forward.
We have one last question over here by Don Carlson, and then, everybody, we have book signing, which will be done up here.
Thank you, Jim.
Don Carlson, PwC. All of your comments are absolutely fascinating, and there are two comments, one from each of you I just wanted to drill down on for a minute. One, of the 10% that favor violence to solve problems, is there an ideological breakdown on that? And then the comment that Celinda made about Democrats' opinion of the 4th of July. Can you, is there some background on that, or is it just an aberration?
Let me answer that one.
Okay, I reserve the right to respond. Who's the lawyer? You're my lawyer.
I'm going to put it in the same category as doing away with Columbus Day. And my 13-year-old, a couple of months ago, I mentioned something about Columbus Day, and he's like, "Dad, it's Indigenous Persons Day." And I said, "Come on." And he said, "Yeah, because Columbus killed 12 million people." And I'm like, okay, he killed 12 million people. My history, from what I remember, he had 3 ships with about 40 men on each ship. And unless they had nuclear weapons when they came here, they didn't kill 12 million people. He said, "No, let me show you." And he gets on the internet, and he pulls up an article that says, Columbus killed 12 million people. And when you read through the article, they blame him for killing 12 million people because he brought disease to the continent. And I'm like, I'm sorry. We on all of these things, we have to look at not only the reality of it. There's people out there that are wanting to do away with Thanksgiving. We call it Friendsgiving, I guess is the new thing. And I did some research on someone that had put a thing up about how it was the blood event. And when you study the history on it, it happened in the next generation, 30 years later. It didn't happen there. And that negates what Thanksgiving was put together for. was the idea of our all coming together and give thanks for the blessings that they have. I think 4th of July, I don't know why.
I'm just
That's
being
on the list.
facetious. I do think
It's a lot to me.
4th of July. I was just being facetious about our party, but I have to say, I think part of respect is respecting Indigenous people. And one of the things I said to Ed is I gave him my card for Bennett because I said Bennett is going to be a Supreme Court justice nominee because it took Ed at least 14 hours. Lisa, his mother, went to bed to argue him down from his position. That's the kind of mind we need on the Democratic side as a Supreme Court nominee. So I'm for Bennett for Supreme Court in about a decade. I think that respecting, the thing that I think is really important is that we all grapple with, and I think we are grappling with, the good and the bad of our history to show respect. And that's an important part of the respect process. But I was just being facetious about the 4th of July. but it's revealing to me that that's believable about us. So I got to watch my jokes here.
On the 10%, one of the scariest things we're seeing is an increase in accepting violence as a means amongst our young men in this country. And I think we really have to be very, very cautious of that and what's happening. We live in Washington. If you drive for 10 minutes around here, you have your example of incivility on where we are. Someone that was shot last week because they shot the bird at someone that cut him off, and the person stopped and shot him and killed him. It is moving from not putting up with certain things to your answer is violence. I did want to mention the violence, by the way, the high concern for violence. One of the things I think the Democrats missed on that whole equation is that some people were concerned about January 6th, but some people also looked at the riots that happened after Floyd and saw that take its next step. And I don't think they can argue back that, well, it was a protest for a cause, because the Black Lives Matter were one of the top groups out there saying, don't do this, but they couldn't stop it. And so the propensity to violence comes and bubbles up from all different places, and I think we have to look at all of the causes, not just one.
Yeah, one of the things that I would recommend, it's really interesting. I'm fascinated by this Canadian example, comparison, and some of the scholars that have worked on it. The original book was called Fire and Ice, ice being Canada, fire being America, and or the United States. And one of the pieces of data that I found shocking was 35 to 40. It varied over time. 35 to 40% of Americans said that you could find an act of violence be a pleasurable experience. That's really frightening, I think. So there's something going on here that we have to get in touch with. And it's really interesting because, and SCAN has done a lot of work on this, that the millennials and the young people are really bringing mental health to the issue agenda. They are extremely concerned about these trends that they see firsthand. And no matter what policy we're looking at, whether it's homelessness, transportation, education, the millennials and younger will say we have to have mental health as a component of this policy. And that's something to me that's very disturbing, that we can't get more consensus, because it's not a partisan issue particularly around mental health. So I think it's just violence questions. It's to me, it's as riveting as it is to you. What is really going on here, and what does it mean for our society? And I grew up with Montana. I used to be, as Jim will tell you, I used to be a competitive marksman, and then gave it up because I went to Massachusetts to school and nobody could understand what I was doing. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I won't bring this up as much until I go home to Livingston.
Oh, very good. All right, you all.
Thank you.